Okay, this is putting women in their place. Part 2. Paul has clearly shown throughout the epistle that Christians are a new social order created to express the fullness of Christ in the midst of the old fallen order. What he is saying in Ephesians 5:21 is that the Spirit empowers Christians to live in a relationship with each other in a radically culturally transforming way, namely through mutual self-submission. The ground for this radically new approach to human relationships is out of reverence for Mashiach. The reason for that reverence, or perhaps better, awe, is the radical nature of Mashiach's earthly life, the total free submission of himself as Yahweh's suffering servant, climaxed in his self-giving on the cross, or storos, Ephesians 5:2 and 25. It is reverence and awe toward that self-giving love that is to motivate our mutual self-submission to each other. Number 3, even the injunction to submit for wives, as for all believers, is based on freedom, not authority. The submission of the wife to the husband is to be as to the master. It is no longer to be the kind expected as a matter of course by cultural norms and forced upon women, who were seen as inferior to males in both Jewish and Gentile cultures. No, her submission is to be freely chosen, being there for her partner, as to the master. That is, as a disciple of the Master, as one who followed in his servant's footsteps, motivated by self-giving love. This kind of submission is not a reinforcement of the traditional norms. It is rather a fundamental change to them. Second, the duties are listed as reciprocal duties. Whereas most household codes simply address the head of the household, instructing him how to govern other members of his household, Paul first addresses wives, children, and slaves. Far from instructing the paterfamilias how to govern his wife, children, and slaves, he omits any injunction to govern and merely calls on him to love his wife. Undoubtedly a common practice, but rarely prescribed. Be restrained in disciplining his children, and to regard slaves as equals before Elohim. This is hardly the language of the common household code, although some ancient philosophers also exhorted moderation and fair treatment of subordinates. The wife, children, and slaves are to regulate their own submission voluntarily. Notice how different this is from the codes. The women are addressed in the codes instead of just the men. And I continue. Number 5, the radical break this represents with conventional patriarchal paterfamilias can be seen in the fact that this code makes unusual demands on the husband, father, or master. The final expression of being filled with the Spirit is submitting to one another, because Mashiach is one's master. All the household codes Paul proposes are based on this idea. But although it was customary to call on wives, children, and slaves to submit in various ways, to call all members of a group, including the paterfamilias, the male head of the household, to submit to one another was unheard of. Although it was assumed that husbands should love their wives, ancient household codes never list love as a husband's duty. Such codes told husbands only to make their wives submit. Although Paul upholds the ancient ideal of wifely submission for his culture, he qualifies it by placing it in the context of mutual submission. Husbands are to love their wives as Mashiach loved the assembly, by willingly laying down their lives for them. At the same time that he relates Christianity to the standards of his culture, he subverts his culture's values by going far beyond them. Both husbands and wives must submit and love. Although the ancient instructions to husbands normally stressed how he should rule his wife, Paul stresses instead that he should love her. Having radically challenged the nature of the culturally expected and demanded submission of the wife to the husband, Paul now goes on to show that self-submission by the husband to the wife, what the self-submission by the husband to the wife looks like in practice. The husband's self-submission, Ephesians 5:21, is to express itself in the kind of radical, self-giving love that Mashiach demonstrated when he gave himself up for the life of the assembly, Ephesians 5:25. Husbands were of course expected to have erotic regard for their wives. But within a culture in which, women were often not more than doormats on which male supremacy could wipe its feet, and in a religious setting where Jewish males thanked God daily that he had not made them a Gentile, a slave, or a woman. In such a context, erotic regard for the wife more often than not became a means of self-gratification and control over the wife. That position of superiority is daringly challenged by Paul's call upon husbands to love agape their wives, that is, to be there for them and with them in self-giving, nurturing, serving love. For that is the way Mashiach loved the assembly, and the husbands, like their wives, are to be imitators of Mashiach. I'm just going to keep on going. Number 1, none of the passages explicitly command wives to obey their husbands. Number 2, Paul's departures from the patriarchal household codes of the day are radical and unsupportive of a male dominance model. Number 3, Paul specifically undermines the absolute authority of the male head of the paterfamilias. Number 4, in the Ephesians passage, Paul requires husband and wife both to submit to one another. Number 5, this mutual submission is self-chosen and modeled after the voluntary submission and servanthood of Yeshua. Number 6, submission is seen in the Pauline passages to be defined or described as respect instead of obedience. Number 7, Paul overturns the male's authority over the household by ordering him to serve in agape love the wife, and to submit to his slaves or servants as well. Number 8, the Pauline passages thus teach a mutual self-giving and self-servanthood for one another. Number 9, the word kefal in the Pauline passages do not alter this understanding of the more explicit elements of Paul's argument, as observed above. Number 10, Paul's injunctions to wives and slaves in these passages do not support a view that he was in favor of slavery or patriarchal marriage structures. Number 11, the case in 1 Peter is different from that in Paul in that it deals with a mixed marriage as opposed to a Christian marriage. Number 12, for practical reasons, the wife is urged to go with the flow everywhere possible, but without compromising her Christian convictions and morals. Number 13, the submission of the wife was to be freely chosen by her for the master's sake and not because of some authority structure sanctioned by Peter. When I say the master's sake, I'm talking about Yeshua, not the master of the house. Number 14, the word for obey only comes up in the Sarah example. It is not used by Peter in the imperatives. Number 15, the example of Sarah was a half example. It showed only the wife's side of mutual submission, since the non-believer could not be expected to be living the other side yet. Number 16, Sarah's calling Abraham Lord was a term of deference and respect, the subject of Peter's injunction here, not of recognition of male authority. Number 17, using this half a verse example in Peter to build a theory that the Bible supports Roman-like male dominance patriarchal marriages over against the many verses otherwise, including the Pauline ones discussed at the beginning, is exceptionally flawed. Number 18, Peter's instructions are for this special case only. Example, mixed marriages with a strong elite Roman male head, and not for Christian marriages. And his few comments on Christian marriages indicates that he held a mutual submission model of marriage like Paul did. Number 19, the resulting view of Christian marriage is one of liberating beauty and equality, and genuine self-giving like Yeshua, love for one another, an immense improvement over the Greco-Roman model for both partners. So it's all about mutual submission and respect and caring. It goes on, but I'm going to stop there because I am almost out of time. But I'm going to continue this with the next video, so we'll see more of where a woman's place needs to be. Thanks, and have a good life. Bye.